Jehovah's Witnesses are often seen in public with their literature carts. They've knocked on your door, and you've seen their places of worship called Kingdom Halls. This group is a very secretive one.
About a minimum once a year, we review records and we do destruction.
Carefully maintaining a harmless public persona while hiding indoctrination and practices.
Yeah, you're ready for a driver's license, but you're not ready to dedicate your life.
That are anything but harmless. I was raised in Edmonton, Alberta, by parents that are Jehovah's Witnesses. Growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, from all outward appearances, everything looks normal to people on the outside. I was, for the most part, a straight A student in elementary school. The teachers seemed to like me. There was never any complaints, at least as far as I can recall. I wasn't the most popular kid in school, partly because I was and am still very much a nerd by nature. And this was, of course, before being a nerd was popular. Leanna, a fellow Edmonton resident, was also raised by Jehovah's Witness parents.
There was 5 originally, siblings, and then my mom and dad. My dad was an elder in the congregation, quite respected. Very, I would say, standard sort of Jehovah's Witness family. Well, being an elder's daughter meant a lot more responsibility as far as your behavior. Just in general, you were expected to be, for the rest of the congregation, an example, a good example. In my case, I was not always a good example, but, my dad had authority in the congregation, and his authority over his family was important, and it was important that he showed that. I always would joke, the only time I remember him hugging me was after I got baptized. He gave me a big hug. He told me he loved me. We went out for dinner. So it was this celebration.
Jehovah's Witnesses preach about a coming paradise world, using imagery and carefully chosen verses from the Bible to convince you of an imminent intervention by God's kingdom. This public version of their beliefs is in stark contrast to what they teach internally about the future of humanity. A global Armageddon, resulting in the death of 99.9% of the world's population, simply because they are not Jehovah's Witnesses. This future for humanity is the subject of much of their propaganda. Even small children are indoctrinated with this view of the future.
We're living in the final part of the last days, undoubtedly the final part of the final part of the last days, shortly before the last day of the last days.
I know as a child now that I probably suffered with anxiety. Bedwetting, I think up until I was 11 or 12 years old, a lot of nightmares, and just generally feeling anxious all the time.
And I can remember waking up in cold sweats and begging and pleading for Jehovah not to let me die, or not to kill my friends or even my family members, extended family members that weren't Jehovah's Witnesses. To ensure compliance with their teachings, corporal punishment is used against children, even in congregation settings like their meetings. My father's sister-in-law, also a Jehovah's Witness, recommended the use of a length of garden hose to my parents as a tool for administering this kind of punishment. Better than a belt, better than a wooden spoon or anything like that, because when you hit the child's bum, it will wrap around and inflict more pain to supposedly get the message through. When someone violates the teachings of Watchtower, they are subjected to a process called a judicial committee by congregation elders. Leanna had to endure 3 of them for violations that could only be considered normal teenager behavior.
It was probably, I would say, one of the most traumatic moments of my life, that judicial hearing. And these men are asking me, specific questions about sexual acts that we did, whether I enjoyed it, whether I had an orgasm. I mean, I'm 15 and we never talked about sex in our house. It was just something married people did.
If the so-called violation is well known in the congregation, as Leanna's was, then an announcement is made to the congregation informing everyone present that the person has received what they call public reproof.
It was so embarrassing. I was already labeled bad, but after that, I was the bad one. I noticed that, friends that I had all of a sudden weren't friends with me anymore.
Leanna's father was one of the elders present in her judicial hearings. When she refused to subject herself to the process and the decision made by the elders, she was branded as an apostate, which means she is viewed as someone who has turned her back on Jehovah God. Her father voiced his displeasure with her.
His words were, "You're dead to Jehovah, you're dead to me. And I don't want to hear you, I don't want to see you. You're here, but you're not part of the family." And then it was shortly after that last judicial hearing that I had my first suicide attempt.
The physical abuse I suffered from my parents, labeled as discipline or spanking, led to depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. I hated them for the physical abuse. I hated them for the emotional abuse. I hated them for the mental abuse. These things that they had inculcated into me. This dread about the end of the world. I hated them for all of that. And I hated living in their house. That hatred reached such a point that in February of 1996, I nearly killed them both in their sleep with a kitchen knife. And I had the knife in such a way that I could have either plunged it straight into his heart or slit his throat. And I was ready to do it. And the plan is that I would kill them, and then afterwards I would off myself and leave the rest in Jehovah's hands. Maybe I could just be certifiably insane, but either way, at least the pain would be over. The solution for Leanna and I was to leave our home and everything we knew behind. Leanna left home after surviving her second suicide attempt.
I just packed a suitcase with a few things and I left. I don't believe they came looking for me.
2 days after nearly killing my parents, I resolved to finally leave. So when I got home from service, I went straight down to my bedroom and I packed up clothes that I would need for school and school books and all of my music collection. So 3 very heavy bags on my shoulders. I snuck up the stairs and opened the back door as quietly as I could, but the back door creaked loudly and I heard my father call out from the living room, "Hello," and I took off running. The house was next to an empty alley, which opened onto an avenue, providing an easy escape route from the neighborhood using back sidewalks and residential streets that would make it hard to find me. Even then, the only time I felt I had escaped was when I boarded a light rail train to take me away from that part of the city. Today, a fence separates the house from the alley, and the alley itself is fenced in. If even one of these fences existed on that day, my escape would have been foiled, and I would have had to face the consequences of trying. Child welfare took me into the system, did an investigation, and declared that home unsuitable for me to live in. Neither of us has any contact with our biological parents anymore.
And it was made very clear to me that they wouldn't be contacting me unless I came back.
We are both shunned by those that abused us for not being Jehovah's Witnesses. Anthony Morris, a member of the Jehovah's Witness governing body, describes their attitude about us.
Now, it's not that we rejoice in someone's death, but when it comes to God's enemies, finally, they're out of the way, especially these despicable apostates who at one point had dedicated their life to God, and then they joined forces with Satan, the devil, the chief apostate of all time.
Leanna and I have both learned an important lesson about the ones we call family.
How you fill that void? Like, you make your own family, you know, and it's okay to make your own family. And I have lots of friends that have become family.
I don't think of them as mom, dad, mother, father. I don't even really think of them as parents. Their names are Bruce and Robin. My true family has exploded wide open. I have people that I call sister and brother. They're my chosen family. They're the ones that mean so much more to me. And I have such an enormous family now that I wouldn't trade for the world. If I could personally address any Jehovah's Witness who is watching this, if you're a teenager and you're looking at the things that you are having inculcated into you and you're questioning it and seeing through it and realizing that none of it rings true for you, the biggest suggestion that I can give you is reach out to your teachers, reach out to your school counselors, make friends and allies with people that are not Jehovah's Witnesses, because you will need them. Those allies that I had in my teen years saved my life.